It was just after 7 on a warm Tuesday evening when Marcus Delaney pulled his black Ford Escape into the gravel parking lot of Doy's Diner on the quiet edge of Springfield, Missouri. The soft hum of his engine faded as he parked near the flickering neon sign that buzzed weakly against the dusk. Inside the car, the faint smell of coffee cups and cardboard boxes still lingered, a reminder of his move only a week ago. The past few days had been nothing but unpacking, endless forms, and lonely microwave dinners in a half-organized kitchen. Tonight, he wanted something real, a hot meal, a quiet place, and maybe a slice of normal life. He wasn't looking for company or conversation. Just peace. When Marcus stepped out, the heavy air carried the scent of fried chicken, baked rolls, and warm gravy, the kind of smell that wrapped around small-town diners and promised comfort. He locked his car, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the glowing doors. Inside, the diner felt like stepping into another time, red vinyl booths, chrome edges dulled by years of use, and a jukebox that hadn't played a song in decades but still stood in the corner like a memory. "Evening, hon, sit anywhere you like," came a gentle voice. It was Marlene, the waitress, gray hair tied back, apron a little stained from long shifts but her smile soft enough to make a stranger feel less alone. Marcus nodded, choosing a booth by the window where the dim orange light from the street lamps fell across the table. He sat quietly, pulling out his phone to check a few notes for work. The screen's glow reflected on his calm face, focused, polite, observant. To anyone watching, he was just the new guy in town, a man who minded his business. And that was exactly how Marcus liked it. Then the door jingled again. A tall man in a Springfield Police Department uniform stepped in, boots squeaking on the tiled floor. Officer Brian Calloway. Everyone in town knew him, loud, confident, always looking for an audience. 15 years on the force had turned his uniform into a costume of power, and he wore it with pride that often bordered on arrogance. He tossed his keys on the counter with a clatter. "Got my usual, Marlene?" he called. She smiled, polite but weary. "Sure thing, officer. Gimme a sec." That's when his eyes fell on Marcus, a face he didn't recognize. Calloway frowned. He didn't like not knowing people. "Don't think I've seen you around before," he said, his voice carrying across the diner. Marcus looked up briefly, offering a polite smile. "Just moved here last week." "Oh yeah? From where?" "Ohio," Marcus said evenly. Something about that answer didn't sit right with Calloway. Maybe it was the calmness in Marcus's tone, maybe the quiet confidence. He leaned back on his stool, voice dripping with forced friendliness. "Well, welcome to Springfield. We like to keep things peaceful around here. You feel me?" Marcus nodded. "That's all I want, officer, peace and a hot meal." A few people chuckled nervously, and Marlene tried to redirect. "Don't mind him," she whispered to Marcus as she poured his water. "He's all bark, no bite." Marcus smiled faintly. "I've met his kind before." Minutes passed, the diner settling into its usual rhythm. The clink of forks, the low murmur of conversation, the hum of the ceiling fan. Marcus began to eat, savoring the taste of something simple. But from across the room, Calloway's laughter kept cutting through the air, louder, bolder, fueled by too much coffee and too little restraint. Then came the question that turned the diner cold. "So what's that guy's deal?" Calloway said loudly, nodding toward Marcus. "You see how quiet he is? Folks like that always think they're better than the rest of us." The regulars exchanged uneasy looks. Marcus ignored it, cutting into his chicken fried steak. But Calloway wasn't finished. He got up, swaggering toward Marcus's booth, his boots clicking against the floor. "You new here, huh?" he said, leaning one hand on the table. "That's right," Marcus replied calmly. "What brings you here?" "Work?" "Yes." "What kind of work?" "Office work," Marcus said simply. "I prefer to keep things private." That word, private, struck Calloway like a challenge. His jaw tightened, and a smirk tugged at his mouth. "We don't do secrets around here, pal. Folks like to know who they're dealing with." "Brian," Marlene warned from behind the counter. "Leave the man alone." But Brian ignored her. He reached down, grabbed Marcus's glass of water, and swirled it slowly as if inspecting it for something. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he set it down hard, splashing water across the table. "Just being friendly," he said. Marcus met his eyes, calm, unwavering. "You should be careful how you define friendly." That sentence cut through the noise like a blade. The diner fell still. Calloway's smirk twisted. And before anyone could react, he reached across the counter, grabbed a fresh plate of mashed potatoes and gravy, and dumped it squarely on Marcus's head. The plate clattered. Gravy dripped down his face, thick and hot. The sound of forks and conversation vanished. Even the jukebox made a faint click, like it, too, was stunned. Marcus didn't yell. He didn't move. He simply reached for a napkin, wiped his eyes, and said quietly, "Feel better now?" Calloway barked a laugh. "You think you can talk slick in my town?" Marcus stood slowly, carefully. He reached into his wallet, placed a few bills on the table. "Keep the change," he said softly to Marlene, then turned toward the door. No shouting, no scene, just dignity walking out of the door with the faint ding of the diner bell. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise could have been. Marlene turned toward Brian, her hands shaking. "You've lost your mind," she whispered. "He'll get over it," Brian said, but even he could feel something sinking inside him. But Marcus wasn't angry, not the way Brian assumed. His silence wasn't weakness. It was control. Because while Brian Calloway had just humiliated a stranger, he had unknowingly humiliated an FBI agent on federal assignment. That night, Marcus sat in his car, still and quiet, gravy drying on his shirt. He made one phone call. "It's me," he said into the phone, his tone professional. "Contact made. Situation confirmed. Proceed as planned." The reply came crisp and low, "Copy that, Agent Delaney." By morning, Springfield was buzzing. Rumors spread faster than coffee poured at Doy's diner. Some said Marcus had mouthed off. Others swore he hadn't said a word. Half the town defended the cop. The other half shook their heads in shame. And by noon, the police chief had called Brian Calloway into his office. "Chief wants to see you," came the voice over the radio. When Brian arrived, he noticed two black unmarked SUVs parked outside the station. Inside, tension coiled like a wire. Officers avoided eye contact. The chief sat at his desk, jaw tight. "You know anything about two federal vehicles outside?" he asked. Brian frowned. "Federal? No, sir." The chief sighed. "Because apparently, the man you decided to dump a plate of food on last night was an undercover federal agent." Brian blinked, pale. "You gotta be kidding me." The chief's voice was flat. "Special Agent Marcus Delaney. FBI. They're here to meet with us." Brian's world shrank. His chest tightened. The chief's phone buzzed, a message. "They're here," he muttered. Moments later, the door opened, and Marcus Delaney stepped inside, not in a soaked shirt now, but in a dark FBI suit, polished, composed, commanding. Brian felt the blood drain from his face. "Agent Delaney," the chief said, standing. "This is Officer Calloway." Marcus's voice was calm but edged with authority. "We were coordinating with your department, until last night." "Look, I didn't know who you were," Brian stammered. "It was a misunderstanding." "You didn't need to know who I was to treat me like a human being," Marcus said. His voice didn't rise, but the words hit like thunder. The room went dead silent. "If I hadn't been who I am," Marcus continued, "if I'd reacted differently, you'd be facing far worse than embarrassment." The chief swallowed hard. Internal affairs will handle this. Marcus nodded. Good. Because accountability isn't optional. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Respect doesn't come from authority, Officer Calloway. It comes from humanity. Then he walked out, leaving behind a silence that felt like judgment itself. The fallout was immediate. Internal affairs arrived by evening. Officer Calloway was suspended pending investigation. Local news picked it up by morning. Springfield officer suspended after incident with federal agent. But Marcus wasn't done. He returned to the diner that evening. The same bell chimed as he entered. Conversation stopped. Eyes turned. Marlene froze behind the counter. You came back, she said softly. Told you the food was good, he replied with a faint smile. She exhaled shakily. Your booth's still open. As he sat, the regulars whispered, but none dared speak up. Then Dean, the truck driver who had witnessed everything, approached. Sir, Dean said quietly. What happened last night, it wasn't right. You didn't deserve that. Thank you, Marcus said. Dean hesitated. People around here see what they want to see. Doesn't make it right, but maybe now, they'll think twice. Marcus nodded. That's the goal. Outside, one of his fellow agents sat in a black SUV, watching, not for danger, but for change. And change did come. The next day, Marcus returned to the station, not out of revenge, but closure. Brian sat there, looking hollow, his uniform gone, eyes red from sleeplessness. Marcus entered quietly. Chief, he said. I need a word with Officer Calloway. When the chief left them alone, the silence was thick. Brian finally said, You didn't have to come back. Yes, I did, Marcus said calmly. Because if I didn't, you'd think this was about punishment. It's not. It's about understanding. Brian's voice broke. You think I'm a monster? No, Marcus replied. I think you're a man who forgot what power means. You wear that badge to protect, not to humiliate. Brian swallowed hard. You're right. Marcus leaned forward. You embarrassed me, but this isn't about me. It's about everyone who's ever been treated like they didn't belong because someone couldn't see past their own bias. Brian's eyes glistened. I never wanted to be that guy. Then stop being him. The words settled between them like peace. Brian nodded slowly. You're not pressing charges. No. The lesson's already loud enough. When Marcus stood to leave, Brian extended a trembling hand. Marcus shook it firmly. Be better, he said simply. Outside, the clouds parted, a thin ray of sunlight breaking through. Closure didn't come from anger, it came from grace. A few days later, Marcus packed his boxes again. His assignment was over. As he drove past Doy's diner one last time, Marlene stood by the window, wiping the counter where he once sat. She'd left a faint stain there, a quiet reminder of what happens when dignity stands taller than hate. Marcus smiled faintly as he turned onto the highway, whispering to himself, on to the next. Because in the end, respect isn't about fear, it's about seeing someone's humanity before their history. And until we learn that, nothing changes.